July 16th, 1974. 11 miles north of Thousand Springs in Elko County, Nevada, near the sprawling pastures of Wine Cup Gamble Ranch. A ranch hand pulls off Highway 93. He's there to check a fence, maybe stretch his legs. Nothing out of the ordinary. Until he sees it. A charred figure in the ditch. Human, but almost erased. A young woman, her body burned, throat crushed. A red fuel can lies nearby, half melted. But the liquid inside doesn't match the fire's pattern. Whoever did this, they wanted her gone. They thought the fire would finish the job. But it didn't. She was young, somewhere between 16 and 25. Caucasian, auburn hair. Even the flames couldn't destroy everything. She's become known only as Thousand Springs Jane Doe, a phantom without a name, another woman left behind along the lonely corridors of the Great Basin. No purse, no ID, no matching report, just scorched sagebrush and silence. But this wasn't random. It was calculated, intimate, cruel. And like so many others in this region, Star Valley, Devil's Gate, Shafter, her death may be part of a larger pattern. Tonight, we reopen the case. We walk a burned out ditch. We sift through the ashes and silence. And we speak for her. Let's begin. So, Angela, how's it going?
It's all right. How are you?
Well, I'm getting there.
Getting there. Week out of surgery.
Yeah, I'm about feeling pretty much normal, except doing everything with one hand.
Yeah.
Again.
That's weird.
But after a year of it's almost becoming normal, which is sad to say.
Yeah. You'll just forget that hand exists here pretty soon.
If it wasn't my dominant hand, it would be a lot easier to do that.
I mean, true.
But
I couldn't imagine.
Yeah, doing everything. And I am not ambidextrous, not even a little bit. I don't even pretend
You're getting a little bit after a year.
Play like it on TV. No, I'm not. I have not gotten any better.
Get on TV.
I have not gotten any better over the last year at using my left hand for anything.
Since when have you been on TV when you won't even let people meet you from the podcast, Mr.
Wouldn't
Man?
you like to know?
I would love to know.
I have been on TV.
I have too, but
a few different times.
Not for anything incredible.
I've been on ESPN and Fox Business and Fox News.
Okay, so people want to go seek that out.
Good luck. Good luck finding it. I haven't been featured. Actually, I was featured on ESPN.
What for?
Ski joring.
Oh.
National Ski Joring Championship.
Very nice.
Yes. All right, so what's it like to imagine a place so remote that even a scream wouldn't carry?
I imagine it's haunting, and it's the kind of quiet that makes you second guess what you saw or heard or what might be buried just off the road.
Exactly. And tonight we're bringing listeners to a place like that. Welcome to Dark Dialogue, the podcast where we uncover the embers of lost cases, stories scorched by time, buried by silence, but never entirely forgotten. I'm John, your guide through the forensics, investigative details, and long shadows of the unknown.
And I'm Angela, here to walk you through the terrain, the forgotten paths, and the desolate stretches of Highway 93, where the silence is louder than any siren. These places aren't marked on tourist maps, but they're where some of the most tragic stories still wait.
This episode takes us back to Elko County, Nevada. It seems like we're never going to get the hell out of here.
We're taking up residency.
It feels like it.
We are.
Deep in the northeastern reaches of the Great Basin. And it's July 1974. Long before national DNA databases or digital alerts, In those days, if you vanished along a rural road, you stayed vanished. And sometimes, if you were found, you didn't get your name back.
And that's what's happened here, 11 miles north of a place called Thousand Springs. A ranch hand from the Wine Cup Gamble Ranch discovered something terrible. A woman's burned body dumped in a roadside ditch just off the fence line. Her throat had been crushed, a melted red fuel can sat nearby, and whoever set that fire made sure her identity went with it.
The autopsy couldn't tell us much, but it did confirm this. She was young, likely between 16 and 25. She was Caucasian, with auburn or reddish-brown hair, no purse, no wallet, no name, and no answers.
And it's easy to think of her as just another Jane Doe, but that's the point of Rocky Mountain Reckoning. We don't lump these women together. We give them space, dignity, and a full episode.
And she wasn't alone. Like we said, there were others. We've covered Star Valley, we've covered Devil's Gate, we will cover Shafter, and several similar victims, similar time frames, similar stretches of lonely road.
The question isn't just who she was, it's whether someone hunted her and whether they hunted again.
In 1974, Elko County was a sparsely populated frontier, roughly the size of Massachusetts, but with fewer than 14,000 people. Out here, Highway 93 was a corridor for cattlemen, truckers, and drifters, the perfect place for someone who didn't want to be seen.
Or someone who didn't want to be caught.
Tonight, we speak for the girl the flames tried to erase. We'll explore the landscape, the evidence, and the possibility that her story is just one chapter in a larger, unspoken tragedy. So settle in, plug in your headphones. This one's not just cold, it's scorched. This is Dark Dialogue Rocky Mountain Reckoning, Season 1, Episode 4, Thousand Springs Jane Doe. The rancher doesn't smell smoke, not anymore. But the reek of gasoline and scorched hair hangs heavy in the morning air. His boots crunch along gravel as he slows near the fence line. Just another day on the range until it isn't. At first, it looks like a blackened brush. Maybe somebody left a campfire smoldering. But then he sees a shape. Twisted, unnatural, burned to bone in some places, blistered skin curling like old bark in others. A red fuel can sits a few feet away, warped, melted. It's wrong, all of it. He steps back, fast now. He doesn't call out, doesn't investigate. He gets in his truck and he drives. Gravel flies, dust rises, and behind him, in a charred patch of roadside dirt, she stays, silent, nameless, erased by someone who thought fire could bury a story. They were wrong.
Drive north out of Wells, Nevada, and the land begins to stretch. There are no stoplights, no guardrails, just bladed gravel roads and horizons scarred by fire and solitude. Here in the high desert, wind smooths the ridge lines and erases footprints faster than a search party can form. You're in a place where even the road seems unsure of its purpose. This is Elko County's northern reach, a region more familiar to coyotes and fence runners than to any city map. And in 1974, it felt even more remote. Fewer people, fewer connections, fewer chances to be found if you didn't want to be, or if someone didn't want you to be found. And 11 miles north of a quiet place called Thousand Springs, someone found a girl. Not a woman with a name, not someone the community recognized. Just a burned body discarded by a ditch near Highway 93, not far from the Wine Cup Gamble Ranch.
And that ranch still operates today, right?
It does. Nearly 1 million acres, depending on how you count leased land. And in the 1970s, it was just as massive. A kingdom of grazing rights and quiet agreements hidden in a region where a single truck can vanish into the landscape like smoke. The Wine Cup Gamble Ranch wasn't just a job site. It was a world unto itself. Crews rotated in and out. Cowboys, hay hands, and seasonal workers chasing checks from Texas to Montana. One of them found her. A ranch hand driving the route between a bunkhouse and a supply post saw something unusual in the ditch. Something blackened and still. It wasn't a coyote, and it wasn't trash. It was a human body burned after death.
So, help paint a picture. What made this area so isolated in 1974?
So that would be two big factors, geography and time. This land is made of lava flows and ancient seabeds, dotted with springs that only locals know how to find. The high desert climate means freezing winters and bone-dry summers with flash floods and lightning storms in between. And back then, it wasn't just isolated, it was nearly lawless. You had CB radios instead of phones, you had paper maps instead of GPS, and if someone disappeared out there, it could take days or weeks before anyone even realized it. That's what made Highway 93 such a strange artery. It connected Wells, Nevada to Montello and the Utah border, but in between, there was nothing. A car could park, a body could be dumped, and no one would be the wiser.
So, what was going on culturally in Elko County in the 70s? I know there was a big mining boom.
So, you're right. Because you often are.
It's not by purpose. It's an accident.
No. So the 1970s mining boom did change the population. Gold and copper operations drew in transient workers, mostly young men, some alone, some with families. Few stayed long. The hotels were booked out, trailers parked behind gas stations. Highway 93 turned into a revolving door of license plates and stories that never got told. The Elko County Sheriff's Office, meanwhile, was under-resourced, as we've mentioned several times before.
Yeah.
Fewer than a dozen deputies over a 17,000 square mile stretch.
Yeah.
They had no DNA, no centralized fingerprint database, and very little forensic capability. Hi. Okay, changing words now. So if you didn't get a name fast, you didn't really get one at all, and that's what happened here.
So how did the locals react? Was there any talk?
Whispers, but nothing public. At feed stores and cafe counters, ranchers might have shared hushed theories about the fire, about strangers parked at pullouts, but there was deep distrust of outsiders, especially law enforcement, and nobody wanted to be the one to say too much. It wasn't silence because no one cared. It was silence because trust was currency out there, and most people couldn't afford to spend it.
So let's talk geography. People hear Thousand Springs and think lush and green.
That's what I thought, but it's not that. The area gets its name from hidden groundwater seeps, which emerge from volcanic rock fissures. They're hard to see unless you know exactly where to look. This isn't a park. It's a stretch of semi-arid scrubland shaped by time and cattle, and rutted by ranch roads that can vanish in a rainstorm. The body was found near one of these back roads off a gravel service route just north of the springs. The ditch wasn't deep, but it was enough to hold a human form, barely visible unless you were looking for it. That's the kind of place this is.
And the body was burned after death. Tell us about that.
So she was strangled first, manual strangulation, hands or forearm, according to forensic records. Then she was set on fire, not ignited in a blaze, but scorched, enough to char clothing and skin to damage evidence. A red plastic fuel can was found nearby, partially melted, but the can is what makes things interesting. The fuel in the can didn't match the accelerant used to burn the body.
Well, that's odd. What does that mean?
You know what that means. It suggests intentional planning, possibly even a forensic strategy. The mismatch could indicate the killer brought a can as misdirection, or had access to multiple fuels, including or using one of those on the body and leaving another nearby to confuse investigators. But we have to be careful with assumptions. The official documents only say the burning was likely an effort to conceal her identity. We can't say for sure what the killer wanted, just what they left behind. And they left her invisible.
So we've covered 2 other victims in this region. Does this case fit that same pattern?
Partly. Like Star Valley Jane Doe, she was found in a remote spot without ID, with signs of post-mortem manipulation. And like Devil's Gate Jane Doe, she vanished without record. But the method, that's where it diverges. Star Valley was posed, maybe even displayed. Devil's Gate had only scattered remains, her cause of death undetermined because so little of her body was found. And this girl, Thousand Springs Jane Doe, she was strangled and burned and left in a shallow ditch off a gravel shoulder. No display, no mystery about how she died, just the silence that followed.
So it sounds less ritualized, more practical.
Exactly. Whoever did this wasn't trying to send a message. They were trying to erase one. No wallet, no clothes, no dental match, no missing persons report from Nevada that lined up. And this was 1974, long before NamUs, long before FBI, VICAP system. If someone filed a report in California or Oregon, like we've said, it never reached Elko. She could have been from anywhere and going anywhere. And now she's buried in anonymity, lost among the ranch lands and silenced trails.
So one last thing. Why this place? Why this ditch?
It offered 3 things: time, cover, and deniability. The ranch road saw little traffic. The ditch was near enough to toss a body quickly, but far enough to avoid immediate detection. And there were no cameras, no patrols, and no chance of discovery until someone happened to drive by. And if they did, well, it wasn't their business. That's how people thought then, and sometimes still do.
Mid-July 1974. Nevada's Great Basin simmers under an unforgiving sky. A ranch hand from the Wine Cup Gamble Ranch is riding fence line, checking the land for signs of damage. About 11 miles north of Thousand Springs, he sees something unusual. Smoke rising faintly from a depression just beyond the highway. It isn't a brush fire. He rides closer. What he finds stops him cold. A woman's body, charred, partially burned. The desert has given up a secret, but just barely. She's lying in a ditch, no more than 200 feet off Highway 93. There's no purse, no ID, no suitcase. Just a warped red plastic fuel can, half melted into the dirt. And a silence that has lasted for 5 decades. This is the story of an unnamed woman, now known only as the Thousand Springs Jane Doe. Discovered on July 16, 1974, her body was found in rural Elko County, Nevada, near the Wine Cup Gamble Ranch. She had been strangled, then, in what appeared to be a calculated effort, set on fire. No one reported her missing in the area, no one came forward, and though the fire was incomplete, it didn't destroy everything, it erased just enough. Her clothes, her face, her name. The red fuel can found beside her was partially melted, and the fuel it contained didn't match the accelerant used to burn her body. This suggests a deliberate forensic effort, possibly, though its purpose remains totally unclear.
Elko County is still remote in many places today, but in 1974, parts of it were effectively off-grid. Highway 93, where she was found, is a long, sparsely patrolled stretch of road connecting mining towns, ranches, and desert crossings. The nearest towns back then, Wells to the north and Contact to the south, weren't places with bustling infrastructure. This was a place where people passed through or disappeared.
The woman was white, likely between 16 and 25. She stood between 5'7" and 5'9", with a slim to average build. Her hair, where preserved, was described as auburn or reddish brown. She had no dental work, but her teeth showed signs of childhood fluoride exposure, molted from likely overconcentration in well water. Investigators tried to reconstruct her dental records. No match. There was no identifying features, no tattoos, no birthmarks, no scars. Nothing survived the fire that could confirm her name.
What follows here is fictional. It's a composite, a way of giving her context using known patterns from the era. Cultural references and victimology techniques used by the FBI. We don't know her name, but we'll call her Clara. Not because it's accurate, but because it's human. Clara doesn't appear in any public record tied to this case or in any other Great Basin episodes. She deserves something more than silence, so we give her a name just this once.
Clara could have been 16, might have been 18, maybe 21. She could have grown up in Boise or Helena or even rural Nevada. A Western girl with grit, maybe a small-town waitress with calloused hands and wide ambitions. Clara might have spent her days working the counter at a roadside diner, pouring coffee for truckers, saving her tips in an envelope that she kept taped beneath her dresser drawer. In her journal, pages worn and folded, she copied lyrics from Joni Mitchell and Janis Ian. She read Ms. Magazine in secret, circling ads for jobs in Reno and San Francisco. She kept a bottle of Jean Tea splash on her shelf, not because it was fancy, but because it made her feel like she had control over how she entered a room. In her duffel, a paperback copy of Jonathan Livingston Seagull, a pressed yellow daisy, 2 pairs of flared jeans worn thin at the knees, a cassette of Linda Ronstadt. These details, her perfume, her books, they're all imagined, reflecting 1974's cultural patterns, but they're based on real belongings from real women who disappeared.
The early 1970s were a period of upheaval. Women like Clara were navigating a country that had only recently started talking about independence and equal rights. But outside cities, especially in places like the Nevada Outlands, it was still dangerous. Trusting someone for a ride could be the only option, and predators knew that. Women who left strict homes or small towns often left without telling anyone, sometimes by choice and sometimes out of necessity. In the era before national databases, a girl like Clara could vanish and never be reported missing, especially if her family assumed she wanted it that way.
Clara might have been traveling along Highway 93, maybe hitchhiking. Maybe she'd planned to meet someone. She might have accepted a ride from a man who said that he was going to Eli or to Elko, or maybe she never got that far. What we know is this. She was strangled. Her body was taken to a ditch about 200 feet from the highway. An attempt was made to burn her, and the fuel can was left at the scene. Whether it was meant to distract investigators or simply part of a crude disposal effort, we can't say. But it points to intent, not impulse.
Elko County investigators worked the case as best they could, given the limitations of the time. Fingerprint records were regional, not national. Dental matches were done manually through mail charts and phone calls. And in rural Nevada, there were no forensic labs within a short drive. The woman's remains were eventually buried, her case went cold, and her name faded into the backlogs.
But Clara didn't fade. Not really. Her bones held evidence. The burn patterns told a story. Even the absence of personal effects raised red flags. This was not a spontaneous act. It was calculated and cruel. It told investigators that someone feared she might be identified, so they used fire, one of the oldest tools to erase identity.
There's no telling what she could have become. A college student, a musician, a mother, a friend. But we know she was young. She was strong. She was strong enough to leave, to try. And whatever circumstances led her to that roadside ditch, they weren't hers to bear alone.
In the decades since, her case has been reviewed. Her NamUs profile is now live. DNA has been extracted and submitted for comparison. But so far, no hits, no matches, no relatives looking for a sister, a cousin, a daughter named Clara.
Sometimes when I think about her, I picture a girl walking with her thumb out, big dreams, a small bag, hope outweighing fear. And I wonder, what did she say when she got into that car? And where did she think it would take her?
The answer is lost, but the fire didn't take everything. There's still time, there's still science, and there's still a community who cares. We carry Clara's name not because it's hers, but because she deserves something more than Jane Doe. Even if we never learn her real name, she will not be forgotten. The desert doesn't bury secrets. It strips them bare. What the sun doesn't bleach, the wind grinds to dust. And what's left, what resists that erosion, can speak louder than the loudest scream. Out here, what remains are bones. And what we call silence might be memory trying to speak. "11 miles north of Thousand Springs, Nevada, buried within the scrubland folds of the Great Basin, a ranch hand stumbled across something unnatural. There was no trail, no monument, just a wash chiseled by flash floods and forgotten by time. He found her there. Clara, that's the name that we've given her. Not a soul knew who she was. She didn't carry ID, no bag, no jewelry, just ash, bone, and a red plastic fuel can left nearby. Her skeletal remains were found burned and exposed in the lonely dry wash. Fire had stripped away the surface of her identity, and it didn't hide what killed her.
Strangulation. That's what they found. Her hyoid bone fractured.
Yeah, it's a tiny little bone in the neck. Break it and you cut off breath. That's not an accident, and it's rarely the result of anything but homicide. This wasn't an overdose. It was not exposure. It wasn't a misadventure in the wilderness. Clara was murdered. Her body had been set on fire after death. That's key. There was no mention of soot in her lungs or her airway, no sign that she was breathing when the flames ignited. That confirms post-mortem burning.
Yeah, that tells us whoever did this wasn't in a panic. They took the time. Time to ignite her. Time to make sure no one would ever recognize her.
And the location? Isolated. I mean, I'm sure that you and the listeners are getting tired of hearing about Elko County, Nevada. I'm tired of writing about it because it's like the same thing. You know how damn hard it is trying to be unique when you're describing the same area?
Yeah.
But it's insane that you've got a cluster of bodies in this freaking place that's in literally in the middle of nowhere.
And might be all different people responsible for it.
Could very well be.
That's
although
so
we
weird.
believe, I can't say we, I believe it's one douchebag from Wyoming.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, it's just so crazy that you can have a cluster. Have you been through this area? I think
No.
I've asked you that before.
No.
I mean, even now, I mean, we talk about it 1974, it being like in the middle. It's in the middle of nowhere right now in 2025.
I have family who go there, who have family there. This is like not by blood, but
right. Yeah.
You know, chosen family and all that.
Yeah. And it's literally in the freaking middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
So it's some of the harshest terrain in northern Nevada, but even by Great Basin standards, this was remote. And that says a lot because the Great Basin is remote. But out here, there's no structures, there's no campsites, just arid gullies, brittle scrub, and the kind of heat that warps the horizon. Clara was found not too far from a road, and she was a ghost waiting out there in the open.
And the fuel can?
That's the detail that keeps surfacing. A red fuel container was found near her remains, containing fuel that didn't match the accelerant used to ignite the fire. That's the freaking weird part. Yeah. It's one of the only objects that was recovered with her. We're not going to speculate on whether it was left intentionally or accidentally, but it wasn't the same type of fuel used to burn her body. That's what matters, and that's what's so freaking weird.
No, it is. So someone came out there with more than one fuel source, because, you know, I travel with more than
Oh, yeah, you know, I have a jug of diesel and a jug of kerosene and a jug of gasoline, and
all the things. Or they fumbled, but they didn't burn her by chance.
No, this wasn't a wildfire. It was a calculated destruction. Now, here's where the research tells us about Clara herself. Her estimated age, late teens to maybe mid-20s. That's an important correction. Early reports floated the age range as 20 to 30, but current forensic review narrows it. Her bones showed signs of dental fluorosis, indicating childhood exposure to high fluoride levels. This could point to places with untreated groundwater, parts of central Nevada, some Utah regions, isolated rural pockets. She had no healed fractures, no surgical implants, nothing obvious to anchor her to a town or a clinic or a dentist. There was no clothing to date or to trace, no accessories, no shoes, and no real height estimate. I mean, I've seen it reported from like 5'5" to 5'9".
Yeah.
So
that narrows it down.
Yeah, and it's very difficult because the fire was extensive enough that not even like the color of her clothing could be identified.
Jeez.
So like her NamUs profile just says clothing burnt beyond recognition or something along those lines. So, I mean, they burned everything.
Yeah.
That, you know, could have potentially led to something. Yeah.
So what about her DNA?
Limited. Clara's skeletal remains were severely damaged by the heat, like I said. Only mitochondrial DNA could be extracted, and even that was partial. So far, no match has been made through CODIS or public genealogical databases, but it's not a dead end. I mean, we've seen other cases where identities have come much, much later. Mm-hmm. You know, we have a case that we'll be covering this season, and that's Bitter Creek Betty, who was not too long ago identified as Irene Vasquez, and that was in the southern part of Wyoming. So it's not impossible. And that was a good chunk of years in between, right? Oh, yeah, that was a good chunk of years. I want to say that she was found in 93 and wasn't identified until 2004. So, yeah, you're talking about a long time. And we're seeing it happen all the time. And, you know, I know I'm not teaching anybody anything when I say this because we all know it. And that is DNA technology advances in leaps and bounds like every freaking year. You know, where we are now compared to where we were in 1990 or 2000 or even 2015 is like worlds difference.
Even a year ago in some cases.
Exactly. So, you know, who knows? I could definitely see where DNA technology could, I would say, relatively soon come to a place where it could take this mitochondrial DNA and form a really solid, geographical profile where we could identify the family that she's from. And then, one would hope that it isn't full of missing people, the family, but who the hell knows?
Okay. So there's still a path forward, though?
Yeah. Ongoing efforts include outreach for familial comparison samples and deeper genealogical triangulation. Clara may not be nameless forever. So now let's place this in the broader context of Elko County, 1974, where some whacked out shit was definitely going on in that area at that time. So Elko, Wells, Carlin, they're not bustling cities. They weren't then, they're still not now. They were staging grounds for men on the move, pipeline workers, miners, ranch hands, transient crews chasing boomtown contracts. Interstate 80 was the artery carrying rigs and wanderers alike. If Clara was hitchhiking, she could have caught a ride from anywhere. Salt Lake City, Reno, Idaho Falls, even as far as Spokane or Sacramento. She might have lived nearby, or she might have never made it past her first lift west of the Rockies.
And women like her, young, alone, without a fixed location, they were invisible to most systems.
Well, that's the tragedy of it all. In the 1970s, if you were a girl on the road, you were labeled as a runaway, a wanderer. Your vanishing didn't trigger an alert. It triggered a shrug. Now layer that with the calculated disposal. The fire was not accidental. It wasn't a campfire that got out of control. Clara was set on fire with the explicit intent to obliterate her identity.
And it almost worked.
Almost. But here's what remains. We have the fractured hyoid bone, the fire, that weird-ass red fuel can with the unmatched accelerant. I don't even know on that one.
It's haunting.
It's freaking...
It keeps haunting us.
Yeah. Her fluorosis and her mitochondrial DNA. And the silence of that wash, broken only by the hiss of wind across burned stone. But here's what doesn't remain. The killer's shadow. We have no vehicle impressions. No nearby tire tracks were recorded in 74. We don't know who transported her. There are no fingerprints that were recovered, no hair fibers. This was a forensic desert, even before time stripped it bare.
And yet she still left something behind. A profile.
Exactly. And we can build out her image through environmental and forensic context. So what we know, she's young, late teens to mid-20s. Her ancestry is undetermined. The mitochondrial lineage is not matched, but she's referred to as Caucasian almost everywhere.
Okay.
She's possibly from an area, I'd say likely from an area with fluoride-saturated groundwater, and she was highly vulnerable, either transient. What's that?
You said, or one of those places that made us swish every day in school.
Yeah.
You remember that?
Oh, God, yeah, I remember it. I just don't think it had started by 74.
Yeah, probably not.
But yeah, I remember.
I was just having a horrible memory.
Freaking nightmare bullshit.
Needed to take you with me.
Don't even get me started on the lunacy of that nonsense.
Vulnerability.
Well, here we have a body that we're identifying because her teeth are jacked because she had fluoride-rich water, and as kids, they were shoving that shit down our throats.
Every day.
Every day.
And you were timed.
Yeah. Anyway. She was highly vulnerable, either a transient or hitchhiking or abducted from a vulnerable setting. Her death was manual strangulation, and we know that because of that fractured hyoid bone. And, if you don't know, that's one of the only ways you can break that bone. If you're strangled by ligature, typically it doesn't break. It's really, and this can be a little graphic, but it's really the pressing of the thumbs down on the neck when you're manually strangling somebody that breaks that bone.
Yeah.
So
tiny little bone.
It's a tiny little bone. And when it's broken, you pretty much know cause of death because that's about the only way it can be broken. It's pretty well protected from any kind of other break, accidental or whatever. I'm not saying you couldn't break it in like a car wreck or something, but it would be unusual. And then we have her disposition, post-mortem fire set to destroy her identity. And the clues, what little clues there are, is really that red fuel can. Yeah. And it wasn't used to ignite the fire. We know that.
I'm really sick of that red fuel can.
Yeah. Tell me about it. It really makes you wonder, like, did something in the test get screwed up? Or
how coincidental was it just left? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, this area isn't like, an area where people go out camping and stuff like that. Where
and they were planting things, so it wasn't like a
no. I mean, think of
field fire like they used to do, or they still do.
No. So, I mean, when you think of this area, and I know this is going to be no help to our listeners, so sorry.
From that area.
But think of driving out like towards Oregon Basin or out towards Grable, where it's just miles and miles and miles of nothing but antelope and sagebrush and cows and wild horses.
And a red fuel can just hanging out.
Yeah.
It'd be very odd.
And, now in those areas, we do have like a lot of people that are out recreating, four-wheelers, ATVs, all that kind of stuff.
So that could have fallen off. Yeah.
But that wasn't really a thing in the 70s. I mean, dirt bikes, maybe.
Yeah.
But the whole ATV craze hadn't really kicked at that point.
No.
So this area was...
And if it did, billionaires were the only ones who were
yeah, I mean,
using them.
Dirt bikes were getting pretty popular in the 70s, but that was about
ATVs.
it. Yeah. I don't even think they were invented in 74. But this area down here, you're going to be either in an old pickup truck out fixing fence or something, or you're on the back of a horse riding cows. That's it. That's what this area was back then. So, yeah, I don't know. We know the fuel can wasn't just left out there. It was part of this crime
out there.
It was part of this crime, but how? I don't know.
And the isolation, that was a weird word.
Yeah, it was.
All right, then. And the isolation wasn't just about the terrain. It was strategic.
Yeah. The killer didn't dump her near a busy route. They brought her into the wilderness. And when you say wilderness, you think trees and shit. You're not talking trees. I'm talking sagebrush. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment panic. It took time and effort. The kind of decision made by someone with privacy and confidence. Whether they knew the terrain intimately or just wanted to be far from everything, we can't really say. What we can say is this. They picked a place where no one was supposed to find Clara, but someone did. And now we're here, still talking about her, still refusing to let her vanish. There's a stillness in these canyons that makes you listen harder. Not because it's peaceful, but because it feels like something's missing. People drive through the Thousand Springs area all the time. Campers, hunters, families on their way to nowhere in particular. But once, someone left a girl there, and no one came back for her. So this is the part that always stays with us. Not the autopsies, not the crime scenes. It's the silence that follows. The girl who was never named. The future that was never told. And in this episode, we've chosen to call her Clara. So like we've said, she was found by a ranch hand about 11 miles north of Thousand Springs on July 16th, 1974. Her remains just skeletal, burned beyond recognition, and scattered across a narrow stretch of desert terrain. The official cause of death was strangulation. A fractured hyoid bone told the story clearly, and the post-mortem burning confirmed a deliberate attempt to hide what had been done to her. But who was she before that?
That's the part we have to fight to recover. The person, not just the evidence.
So the forensics tell us that she, like we've said, she was late teens, early 20s, no dental fillings, no fractures, tattoos, no implants, nothing modern enough to narrow down her origin. But there were the clues, the subtle ones, like the dental fluorosis that we talked about. And that's a staining or mottling of the teeth caused by high levels of fluoride, often from untreated well water. It typically appears in rural areas, desert basins, small towns, and off-grid homesteads. It's not a conclusive lead, but it's a starting point.
So she may have grown up in a remote community somewhere in the West, Nevada, Utah, northern Arizona. Some low fluoride levels in the drinking water were naturally high.
Exactly. And if she grew up isolated or transient, that could explain why no missing persons report ever connected her. Clara has never been matched to a single missing persons case. Not in Nevada, not in surrounding states, not anywhere. No family came forward. No composite sketch made the rounds. She slipped into the void. The report confirms that her body was burned after death. There's no mention of soot in her windpipe or in her lungs, but the forensic damage to her bones and the condition of the remains indicated post-mortem fire. Near her remains that weird-ass freaking gas can. And this is where it gets curious. So like we've already said, the fuel inside that can didn't match the accelerant used to ignite her body. The contents were chemically different, suggesting the use of maybe multiple substances or possibly a failed ignition attempt. The can itself was left at the scene. It may have been overlooked or abandoned in haste, or it may have been something else entirely, an oversight in an otherwise deliberate act. What we can say is this: the fire was designed to destroy identity, not merely cover a crime.
And yet they brought her there. That place, 11 miles from anything, wasn't an accident.
Probably not. But speculation about whether the killer knew the terrain isn't something that we can confirm. The dry wash where she was found is remote, yes, but that's all we know. Whether the killer was local or just passing through, we're left guessing. What we do know is that Clara was not posed. Unlike Star Valley, unlike Devil's Gate, where the remains were limited to a partial jaw and scattered bones, or Star Valley, where Emily was found nude, posed in a cross-like manner, Clara wasn't positioned with intent. There's no indication of ritual, no arrangement, no attempt at dramatics. She wasn't meant to be found. If the fire had been hotter, if the rancher had taken a different path, it's entirely possible that we'd never have known that she was there at all.
Yeah, she would have been reduced to ash in the sagebrush and gone without a trace.
Exactly. And that's what sets her apart. Her case contains anomalies, not similarities. Her fluorosis is unique among the cluster. The red fuel can and mismatched accelerant, also unique.
And annoying.
And she's the only victim in the Great Basin series with evidence of fire as a forensic strategy.
The only one? Really?
The only one.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's obviously an attempt to obliterate, not just delay discovery. And what's chilling and tells us something about the person who left her there. Not a moment of rage, not a chaotic crime. This was calculated. It was controlled. It was final. So let's talk about the context. 74 Interstate 80 was the artery of the West. Mining operations, cross-country hauls, transient workforces, it all funneled through Elko County. I-80's corridor was a hub for transient workers and drifters. This desert wasn't empty. It was moving. People were coming and going, hitchhiking, crowds couch surfing, hopping from mine to mine, and not everyone stayed long enough to be missed. If Clara was one of them, young, alone, traveling without ID, then she could have vanished from a gas station, a truck stop, or a roadside diner without anyone noticing.
And the person that took her could have vanished just as fast.
Exactly. This wasn't just a killing, it was a disappearance. And if not for the wind, the sun, and the fragility of fire, it may have stayed that way. We returned to her for a reason, not just to piece together the fragments of a crime, but to hold space for the person lost inside it. Because Clara, like every one of these women, deserves more than a number, more than a coroner's report, more than a line in a spreadsheet. She deserves a name, a history, a reckoning. And as long as she's unknown, we're going to keep searching. There's a desolation that clings to Thousand Springs. It's not just the isolation, it's the absence of names, of answers, of time. The wind doesn't whisper. It scrapes, carving through barren ridges and eroded washes, carrying nothing but emptiness. That's where Clara was left, down in the ribs of the land. No headstone, no note, no name. But fire can only take so much. Some stories burn brighter when someone tries to extinguish them. 3 women, 3 counties, 3 years. They were never named in life, only numbered in death. Emily, found nude and posed in Elko County in 1972. Rachel, reduced to scattered bones in White Pine County later that same year. And now Clara, burned nearly beyond recognition in Elko County in 74. No missing persons reports ever matched their descriptions. No one ever came forward, and no one has ever been arrested for their murders. Yet the proximity, the brutality, and the concealment keep raising the same question. Was there one predator haunting Nevada's Great Basin in the early 1970s? Some investigators and analysts refer to this as the Great Basin killer theory, but how credible is it? Let's begin with geography and timeline. Emily was discovered first, July 14, 1972, in that secluded cattle pasture near Star Valley in Elko County. Her remains were found nude and posed in a cruciform position. Official records confirm her cause of death is 2 gunshot wounds, one to the neck, another to the left cheek. She had no identification, and the scene contained no clothing, jewelry, or shoes. Less than 3 months later, on October 2nd, 1972, Rachel was found in White Pine County. What remained was a partial jawbone and scattered bones in a ditch near the Devil's Gate area. Her cause of death could not be determined. There is no confirmed dismemberment, no clothing or very little clothing, those weird-ass La Fisa shoes, and no belongings other than that were recovered. And then, July 16, 1974, nearly 2 years after Emily, Clara was discovered by hikers in a dry wash 11 miles north of Thousand Springs, also in Elko County. Her skeletal remains bore signs of strangulation, evidenced by the fractured hyoid bone, and she had been burned. We've got the weird-ass stuff going on with the fuel can. We've got one fuel can there, but that one totally has me stumped. I have no freaking idea.
I'm so annoyed by that fuel can.
And then we've got the fluorosis of her teeth, which tell us probably the area that she grew up was central Nevada, Utah, southeastern Oregon. Those regions where the natural groundwater sources carry unusually high fluoride levels. There's no reference for New Mexico or Colorado or places like that as likely points of origin in this case. Despite the close timing and geographic proximity, there's no direct evidence linking the 3 cases. But still, the echo between them lingers, and at least for me, I mean, it just screams something's going on. You got a cluster of bodies. The thing that really is off is the MO is different.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes it really hard, but you're talking about it. I don't know. It's strange. So what draws some of the Great Basin serial killer theory is the assumption of a pattern, perhaps even an escalation, in the way that these women were killed and left behind. Emily's death appears clinical and symbolic. Her body was posed in a cross-like position. There were no mention of defensive wounds in the official records, only the clear note of 2 gunshot wounds, precise and deliberate. The absence of clothing or identification was complete. Rachel's case offered far fewer details. We didn't even find all of her. We were missing the entire torso. We found partial jaw bones and then some scattered vertebrae and fragments. Really no clothing or personal effects were found. The condition of the remains and the lack of trauma indicators made it impossible to determine her cause of death. There's no indication of dismemberment. Whether her bones were scattered by weather, time, or wildlife couldn't be definitively stated. But Clara's case stands apart due to the burning of her body after death. Her fractured hyoid bone points to strangulation, and that weird-ass fuel can, holding a different fuel than was used, introduces a layer of confusion.
To say the least.
Yeah, if not deliberate deception. And then we've got her teeth that are marked by the fluoride.
But when you look at the map, it's hard not to notice how deliberate these places seem. Star Valley, Devil's Gate, Thousand Springs. None of these are easy access locations, especially in the early 70s. These aren't places you stumble across. You have to go looking for them or know about them already.
Exactly. This terrain is rugged, the roads remote, and the population thin. For someone to bring a body out here, it required time, knowledge of the area, and a level of confidence that they wouldn't be seen. But whether that's evidence of a repeat offender or simply the geographic reality of this part of Nevada is a matter of debate. Another aspect of this theory lies not just in how the victims died, but in how little we know about who they were. All 3 were young women. All 3 remain unidentified, and in all 3 cases, there were no matching missing persons reports. Not then, and not now. No one seems to have looked for them. Emily's profile suggests she was in good health, likely in her late teens or early 20s. Her remains were well preserved enough for cause of death to be determined, but she carried no dental work, no surgical history, no identification. Her death, posed, stripped of all identity, seemed choreographed. Rachel's skeleton was so incomplete that even her age estimate is rough. But like the others, she left behind no trace. No signs of life lived before her death. Clara, despite having the most distinctive forensic feature in her fluorosis, has yet to be identified. Her mitochondrial DNA has been entered into national databases, but no matches have emerged. Ongoing efforts at genetic genealogy may eventually lead to answers, but so far, they haven't. These women didn't just disappear. They vanished into a void where their identities, their histories, even their families remain absent.
It's heartbreaking, honestly, because it's not just that their killers haven't been caught, it's that their names haven't been restored. And if no one reported them missing, it makes you wonder about the circumstances before they died. Were they runaways, hitchhikers, migrant workers? Did they have anyone?
That's what makes their story so haunting. Even with evidence, even with skeletal remains, even with DNA, we still don't know who they are. So, was this one killer or just a chilling coincidence? There are similarities. 3 women, 3 years, 3 remote sites in the Great Basin. No identification, no clothing, no missing persons reports. But like we said, the methods differ. One was shot, one was likely strangled, and one's cause of death is completely unknown. The disposal methods differ too. Posing, scattering, and burning. The lack of consistent forensic evidence, no matching DNA, no shared ballistics, no weapons, no fibers, prevents any formal connection. Still, the theory remains, and I've got to bring it up here that I continually go back to my theory on Star Valley that what if she wasn't posed?
Mm-hmm.
What if she was just drug out there and dropped?
Yeah.
Because then we have very similar disposals with the exception of Clara being burned. Other than that, we cannot say the Devil's Gate was dismembered. It's
right.
very likely that she was taken out there and dropped, and that coyotes or something spread her body, which happens. I mean, it's grotesque to think about, but it happens all the time.
Yeah.
So it's very possible that you have 3 women that were just hauled out and dumped, which matches perfectly, except for Clara being burnt. So just needed to bring that up. But what else can explain 3 women being murdered and abandoned in such similar ways in the same state during the same area without a single resolution?
And I think part of the power of this theory is the silence. The idea that someone could do this over and over and never leave a fingerprint, never be noticed, never be missed. It's like these women didn't just die, they were erased.
And in a region like this, the vast stretches of nothing, decades...
All the nothing?
All the nothing. I mean, Wyoming's that way.
All the nothing.
Drive across Wyoming and you're driving across a whole lot of nothing. I mean, you know, if you grow up on ranches and stuff like that, you see the grass out there. You see that it's great terrain for cattle or for sheep.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's nothing. It's just wide stretches of open land. And, you know, this area...
Down in sagebrush.
Yeah, and this area of northern Nevada is the same way. It's just open land. We have decades of underfunded law enforcement and transient populations. It's impossible. But even if there was no Great Basin serial killer and what we're left with is just as devastating. 3 women, still unnamed, still waiting. Before we close this segment, we want to acknowledge the discrepancy that often appears in online sources. Some platforms, including public wikis and case databases, claim that Clara had auburn hair and was found wearing a blue-green blouse and jeans. However, official records confirm that no clothing or fabric was found at the scene. We reference the auburn hair detail only to reflect what's been widely circulated online. And it's also included in her NamUs profile, so I have a lot of faith in the auburn hair. But the NamUs profile says no clothes could be identified. Okay. So even though I saw this blue-green blouse and jeans pop up quite a few times, I could find nothing to just tell me that that was true. I think she does have auburn hair, but the clothing, I don't think we can say at all. So Emily, Rachel, Clara. We gave them those names, not their families, not their friends. We did, because those people are still missing too. We may never know who took their lives. We may never know who they were in life, but we refuse to let them stay forgotten. And we will keep asking, was there a Great Basin serial killer? Or was there just a Great Basin silence? July 16th, 1974. 11 miles north of Thousand Springs, Nevada. That's where they found her. A ranch hand, moving through barren ridges, came upon skeletal remains, scorched, fragile, and nearly consumed by fire. No ID, no belongings, no sign that anyone had been there searching for her, just her bones, fractured and blackened, and beside them, a red plastic fuel can. We call her Clara, but that's not her name. That's the name that we gave her, because someone should have said her name out loud by now.
The landscape north of Thousand Springs isn't the kind of place where people stumble into. The wash where Clara was found cuts deep through the hard desert soil, dry most of the year but carved by flash floods after rare summer storms. It's not near a campground, not close to the highway, not along any worn trail. But in 1974, someone knew how to get there, and they brought her.
Claire's remains were skeletal, badly damaged by fire, and the fire was intentional, but it came after death. Like we've said, her hyoid bone was fractured, and that points to strangulation. A brutal, intimate method, one that leaves no room for accident.
So intimate.
Oh, man, yeah. You've really got to be a sick son of a... I mean, you got to be a sick son of a bitch to kill somebody anyway, but to actually have your hands around their throat and watch the life leave, because it takes a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just brutality.
Was it like 3 to 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she didn't have any clothing, no jewelry, purse, backpack, nothing at all that could link her to the life that she had lived. And then beside her, that weird ass fuel can.
Oh, stop with the fuel can.
And forensic analysts determined that the accelerant used on Claire's body didn't match the fuel found in the can. That contradiction remains completely unexplained. A detail that feels like a clue, but it hasn't yet led to anything.
I have nightmares about the fuel can.
Welcome to my world. I know. Claire's official case file provides very little about her identity. Ancestry, undetermined. Stature, no real estimate possible due to the extent of fire damage. Hair, maybe auburn. We think auburn. And clothing, nothing. But we've got the one small clue, which is the fluoride found in her teeth. It might sound technical, but it's deeply personal.
Dental fluorosis comes from long-term exposure to naturally high levels of fluoride in drinking water during childhood. It causes faint white markings on the teeth, sometimes even surface pitting. In Claire's case, those markings survived the fire, and they suggest she grew up in a region where fluoride levels were unusually high. Based on environmental data from the 70s, that points to specific areas in central Nevada, Utah, and parts of rural Oregon. Not Colorado, not California, and not anywhere near Thousand Springs.
And, you know, it seems like we keep repeating this, but we're repeating it for a reason, and that is because that's the only way we're going to find her.
Yeah.
Either the DNA comes through and we're able to track her genealogy and figure it out, or we need to identify a family in this area that is missing a girl from that era. You know, and maybe it's an aunt, or maybe it's a cousin, or
now it would be.
Maybe it's somebody that you just heard a story about, but somebody's missing somebody, and somebody's missing a lot of freaking somebodies.
Yeah.
Why
aren't they talking about it?
If researching this has taught me anything at all, it is that we have a lot of bodies that don't have families to attach them to.
Yeah.
And it's really freaking sad.
And a lot of families that aren't really talking about people they're missing.
I know, and the hard part of it is this
family wouldn't shut up about it if somebody was missing.
I know, but the hard part about it is this era. And that's what I got to keep reminding myself of. I didn't experience this. I was born after this period of time. So, but, you know, we talked about it in the Devil's Gate case. I mean, in the Summer of Love, which was 67, 100,000 kids.
Yeah.
One summer, 100,000 kids left home to travel to San Francisco. That didn't count the kids that were headed in other directions.
Yeah.
That was 100,000 just to the Haight-Ashbury district.
A lot of kids.
San Francisco.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you extrapolate that out, yeah, most of them were headed to San Francisco, but Missoula, Montana was a huge mecca during the hippie movement.
Really?
Yes.
I did not know that.
Yes. So some of them would have been heading there. Some of them would have been heading to New York City.
See, you teach me the things.
Yeah, they actually say that the hippie movement started in Missoula, Montana, and San Francisco, California.
Interesting. I've only ever heard San Francisco.
Oh, yeah. Missoula is definitely a big part of it. But, you know, some of them were headed to New York City.
Yeah.
A lot of hippies in the hippie movement went to New York City as well. So, I mean, you're talking hundreds of thousands of youth on the road during this time. It's weird as shit
Scattering like
to think about, because it's rare now to see hitchhikers.
Yeah.
And even when I was younger, you would see a few more of them, but it was rare. And most of them were not dudes that you wanted to pick up,
Anybody that you wanted to pick up.
Yeah, the vast majority of the hitchhikers I've seen in my life have been men. I think in my life, women have pretty much.
I've seen a lot of women.
I really have not encountered that many women hitchhiking alone. I've come across a lot of men, but lately, for the last 15 years or more, I've hardly seen any hitchhikers.
Yeah.
To imagine a country just full of young, normal kids hitchhiking, it's hard to imagine, but that's what this period was. Fire is an old trick. People think it solves things, that it covers up mistakes, makes problems disappear, but fire doesn't erase identity. It just complicates recovery. Whoever killed Clara, whoever placed her body in that wash, poured some accelerant on it and struck the match, they were trying to destroy something, evidence, identity, personhood, but they failed because here we are, talking about her, naming her, refusing to let her vanish.
There are reasons people choose fire. Sometimes it's rage, sometimes it's fear, and sometimes it's not about destroying evidence. It's about destroying a person so completely that no one even tries to find out who they were. But even the charred absence of a life leaves shadows, and Clara's shadows are everywhere.
And let me just say, would you please stop trying to burn bodies? The shit
don't get it hot enough.
The shit doesn't work.
No.
And I granted, we're talking about a Jane Doe that happened to be burnt, but we're talking one of 3 right now in the series. It's going to grow. Foreshadow. Throughout this season, we're going to be talking about a few Jane Does, and she will be the only one who was burnt. So, although, we talk about it, stuff like that, we've still got to address the fact that I don't think she's not identified because she was burned. I think she's not identified because of the time and the area where she was found.
Yeah.
I don't think she's any different as far as that goes from, Star Valley Jane Doe, Devil's Gate Jane Doe, Shafter Jane Doe, Fox Park Jane Doe. I could go on and on and on. Sheridan County Jane Doe. I don't think that makes it any different,
So to sum up, John doesn't think she's unknown by fire.
Yes.
Stop doing it.
Stop doing it. Shit doesn't work, man. It doesn't work. So when investigators found Clara's remains in the dry Nevada basin, they weren't greeted with much. She, like we said, was skeletal, burned, anonymous. Her bones lay scattered in a charred wash 11 miles north of Thousand Springs. Official records confirm that she died by strangulation, evidenced by that fractured hyoid bone, and the fire came post-mortem. But beyond that, there wasn't much else.
And by the time law enforcement got there, whatever evidence hadn't already been destroyed by fire was being erased by time. Wind, sun, and scavengers. It's like the desert was trying to swallow her.
Exactly. No wallet, no jewelry, no vehicle at the scene, that weird-ass plastic, or the weird-ass fuel can. I don't know exactly what it was. I didn't see pictures of that.
See,
I'm picturing it just being a red gas can.
Yeah, but in the 70s, wouldn't it have been more metal? Weren't they more metal back then?
That's what I was trying to think of too. And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if they were producing plastic gas cans in 1974 or not. I grew up using almost all
metal.
Actually, I can't even say almost. I think I grew up using exclusively metal gas cans. But
yeah,
I also grew up with a dad that is quite a bit older than like other dads of kids in my generation. So I also grew up driving a tractor from the 1930s.
No.
So I don't know if that was just my childhood experience.
I don't think it was, because most of mine are metal as well.
Yeah, I mean, the plastic
I don't
thing,
remember plastic till like the 90s for some
I
reason.
don't either, really. I
Then
mean,
we had to replace some, and they had to be plastic.
yeah, I mean, during my partying years when we were out having kegers and bonfires and stuff like that, all the gas cans by that point were plastic.
Mm-hmm.
All of it that you bought. And so that would have been 90s.
Yeah.
Before that, I can't remember. I can't say that I ever bought gas cans. It's something I probably should have researched. I didn't even think about it until we started talking about it.
Because you never know what questions I'm going to ask you.
Well, I was thinking the same thing, though. So we were definitely on the same wavelength.
You sure are.
But it's something I probably should have researched. But I'm assuming because it is continually referred to as a red plastic fuel container, it almost had to be a gas can.
So weird.
Yeah. It's super.
There needs to be a better word for weird, but I can't find it.
Yeah, I've got a word, but I'd have to drop the F-bomb in order to use it. So
And I'd get to put another term
no,
mark.
I'm not dropping the F-bomb.
Dang. Okay.
So the purpose of that fuel can remains completely unknown. I mean, I don't even have a good idea. I wish that I could have found the report that said, the fuel used to burn her was gasoline.
Mm-hmm.
The fuel found in the can was diesel or kerosene or whatever, so that I could at least maybe understand that, maybe if it was something with a lower flash point like diesel, maybe they tried and couldn't get it lit or something.
So they had to get a different
So then they used gasoline. I don't know. It's weird.
Because I really don't want to give them the power of being smart enough to leave a different fuel source behind just to confuse us.
Well, and
all this time later.
I saw that reported several times. That's why I included it, because it was said that it might have been a forensic countermeasure, but no one would explain what that would mean. What do you mean a forensic countermeasure? How does that throw you off the trail? By leaving a different accelerant than what you used?
Yeah.
What does that prove? I mean, I couldn't figure out, maybe I'm just obtuse and I just don't see it, but I couldn't understand how leaving a can of diesel fuel, for instance, and using gasoline could throw anybody off of anything.
Yeah.
I mean, if they do the testing, which they did, and they come back and they say, which I don't know what they come back with, but let's say they come back and said this was gasoline. So now you're going to go look at gas receipts for this date.
Yeah.
Well, you're still looking for gas receipts? If they found a diesel can, now you've just made it easier, because now they're going to be looking for somebody that
even
bought
less
gas
receipts.
and diesel. So I don't understand how it could be a forensic countermeasure. I think it was maybe an oversight, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe he tried to burn the body with one accelerant. It didn't work. He used another one, and he got in his truck and drove away and didn't even realize that he'd left the first can.
Or he was like, you're worthless to me. I'm just leaving you here.
Yeah.
The can.
The can. Yeah. I mean, who knows? I don't know, but it remains completely confusing and
annoying.
Yep. So let's talk about what else investigators had. The remains were too damaged to determine Clara's height. Her ancestry was officially listed as undetermined, although I have seen it listed, like I said, multiple times as Caucasian. Contrary to some online sources, there were no healed fractures reported. No clothing was found at the scene, though some external sources have claimed that she wore a blue-green blouse and jeans. That isn't supported by any official evidence. Likewise, while some reports circulate the idea that Clara had auburn hair, the truth is more stark. It's reported. Hers is so difficult because some sites report it as the hair was burnt to a degree that it couldn't be identified. Others state clearly that it was auburn hair, but I really do just refer to NamUs because I trust NamUs, and they say it was auburn hair and no clothes were recovered. So that's what we're going with.
Okay. Which means we're working with even less than it first appears.
Exactly. The things that usually help investigators, like jewelry, clothing brands, dental records, even something like a healed injury, they just weren't there. The fuel can was weird as hell, but it didn't lead anywhere. No fingerprints, no purchase trace. The accelerant inside wasn't the one used. It's not clear if it was left behind by the killer or if it maybe had nothing to do with Clara at all. The absence of missing persons report changes everything. It cut off any chance to track her last movements. No contacts, her known haunts. That's one of the hardest things to accept in this case. No one noticed that she was gone, or if they did, they didn't report it. It raises the possibility that Clara lived on the fringes. Maybe she was estranged from her family. Maybe transient. We just don't know.
And that's something that we've seen across this series. Women who were possibly moving through Nevada in the 70s, working, hitchhiking, following opportunity. But when they vanished, no one came looking.
In Clara's case, her mitochondrial DNA has never matched to a known relative. That doesn't necessarily mean that no one submitted a sample. It just means there's been no hit. The DNA is still in the system. It's possible the right person just hasn't come forward yet. And this just gets me on my soapbox just a little bit here because you know me. Yeah. I am like the most private person. Like, I don't want nobody in my business. I don't share my shit with nobody. But I specifically joined Ancestry.com and submitted my DNA for a couple reasons. One, I thought it was fascinating and I wanted to see what my DNA said as far as where I came from, because I've always been told that I am like almost all Scottish with some German thrown in there and a little bit of Irish. It turns out that's complete bullshit. That's just like family legacy or whatever, but I'm mostly Northern European and then some other areas, and the Scottish part of me is actually considerably less of my DNA than what one would think. And so I found it very interesting. But the second reason is I wanted my family's DNA out there, because if there's somebody in our family that's missing, and you never know. Mm-hmm. Like, I had a great aunt who, and it wasn't until after she had passed away that we found out that she had had a baby in like the 30s, like the 40s probably, when she was like a teenage.
Gave it up.
And yeah, and we actually met the woman and all that kind of stuff. But
did you?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. She looked us up and we met her and stuff. She was really nice. It was really cool. But the fact is there could be somebody like that out there that's linked genetically to my family that I don't even know about.
Yeah.
That could be one of these Jane Does. And so I wanted my DNA out there. I got nothing to hide. Like, I ain't gonna, go kill anybody or whatever. So if my DNA is on file, I'm not really too worried about it. So I encourage families that just do that, because the more people are in the system, then the more genealogy that we have to attach these cases to, the more paths we have that we can follow down to see if we could identify these people. And at the end of the day, we talk about, nobody's missing an aunt or a cousin or something, but, we're talking this long, you might not even know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very possible, because I've never been at all close with my dad's side of the family, nor my mom's side, but I don't really know my dad's side of the family for all intents and purposes. There's a very good possibility that there's like a second cousin or something out there that's missing that I wouldn't even know about.
Right.
Because it's not like I know everybody in my extended family.
Yep.
So you might not even know it, but you submit your DNA and it hits that it's in your family tree, then they can kind of weed that down and find that it belongs to, oh yeah, that weird ass uncle that dad never spoke to because they got in a fight when they were in high school and never talked again.
Yeah.
Whatever the case may be. So I know I'm on my soapbox.
It has solved a lot. By reverse genealogy, it has solved a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, it freaking put D'Angelo behind bars in
So I don't have
California.
specifics because my brain files aren't like yours, but I knew that you would if I brought it up.
Oh yeah. And so, I mean, yeah, it is putting perpetrators in jail, and it is identifying unidentified people and giving them back their name and their families.
Yeah.
So it's huge. So I mean, obviously everybody's free to do whatever the hell you want to do. And I would never judge somebody. Like, if it's not your thing, if you don't want it out there, I completely get it, because I'm really more geared that way. So He's not
a resident mystery man.
Yeah, absolutely. But so if you don't want to do it, then that's fine. I'm not trying to guilt you into it. But if it's just because you haven't gotten around to it yet or something, do it.
Yeah.
And it's like $100. I think the 3 Ancestry one was like $100 or something. It's not like it's very expensive.
Not that I haven't wanted to. I just haven't gotten around to doing it yet. But so, what about the fire? Do we know why she was burned?
We don't. All we know is that it happened after death. There are theories. Maybe it was meant to destroy evidence, though oddly, the fuel used to burn her wasn't the same as that was found in the can. Maybe it was a failed attempt at total destruction, or maybe it was symbolic and meant to punish or erase, but that's just conjecture. The other thing I was thinking about is maybe they bought or brought this fuel for this purpose and it didn't work, because unfortunately I have nothing. I don't have the lab report that says what the fuel is, but I was just spitballing. I've driven truck. I've, been a ranch kid. So I was thinking, well, what if you go buy this fuel and it doesn't work, whatever. And so you're like rummaging through your truck and you find, I don't know, a can of ether or something like that. Ether is used as starting fluid to start everything. You just gave me a weird look. Like,
no, I was... Sorry,
why would you have ether?
I was adjusting.
Ether is also used to like knock people out. So I thought maybe you're...
So I hope you don't have ether.
Like a kidnapper or something. But no, I mean... typically you'd have a can of ether or starting fluid under the seat or something. Maybe the fuel in the can didn't work, and so he grabbed a can of ether, or maybe he grabbed a freaking bottle of moonshine. Yeah. Or, who the hell knows, because we don't know what the accelerant was. So that's kind of what I was thinking, is maybe he brought this can intending to use it and it didn't work. And so he just grabbed whatever he had on hand. But who the hell knows? I don't know. Because all we know is that the fire was incomplete. Clara's skeleton was left behind, enough for cause of death to be determined, and enough for the dental fluorosis to be observed, but not enough for ID. It was an act of concealment, not obliteration. So let's talk location. Clara was found in a narrow dry wash in Elko County, far from any major road. No one saw anything suspicious. No drivers passing through, no tire marks noted in official records, just a scorched hollow in a sun-bleached landscape.
And back then, there wasn't any local infrastructure for this kind of case, no regional DNA databases, and no state task force, so no forensic genealogy team either.
Correct. The file sat for decades. It wasn't until the 2000s that her case was even re-examined seriously, and not until much later that DNA was processed. Today, we have her biological profile, but we're still missing the most important piece, and that is her name. And this is where we return to a hard truth. The system didn't fail because it didn't care. It failed because it wasn't built for this. In 1974, the idea of national coordination on cold cases didn't even exist. Nevada's rural sheriffs weren't connected to other jurisdictions. There was no NamUs, no widespread use of dental databases, and Clara, like so many others, was lost in that gap.
That's what haunts me. It's not just about the one woman. It's about all the ones like her. All the Claras who never made it into a flyer, who never had anyone knocking on doors or asking for updates.
Exactly. The missing aren't always missing to everyone. Sometimes they're only missing to us. And that's why we keep telling their stories, because Clara didn't disappear. She was taken, and somebody knows who did it. The Great Basin is a place defined by contradictions, expansive yet claustrophobic, isolated but deeply connected by rail lines, ranch roads, and memory. For the unidentified woman that we call Clara, these contradictions shaped not just the way she died, but how easily she disappeared. She wasn't the only one.
Clara's remains were found in a dry wash 11 miles north of Thousand Springs, Nevada, on July 16th, 1974, as we have mentioned. However, there's no mention of a road nearby, no clear path leading to the site, just empty country where few people venture without reason. That kind of landscape, it swallows the living and erases the dead.
And it's not unique to Elko County. Across the border in White Pine County, another identified woman we had already talked about last episode, Rachel, was found in a ditch, her bones scattered and sun bleached. And a year earlier, or a few months earlier, Emily was discovered outside Elko with the 2 gunshot wounds, one to the neck, one to the cheek. Her body may be posed. But while their methods differ, their placements share something eerie.
Yeah, they were all left where no one was supposed to find them.
Clara's placement in a dry wash wasn't accidental. There was no slope, no debris filled, just skeletal remains scattered in a shallow basin typical of eastern Nevada's terrain. It's the kind of place that floods in the spring, scorches in the summer, and freezes in the winter. And it's exactly the kind of place someone might pick to be forgotten. The remoteness of her discovery makes one thing clear. This was not panic. It was planning, but what kind? Clara's cause of death was strangulation. That kind of injury speaks to direct contact, to force and control. Official records offer no evidence of additional trauma or restraint, and no indicators survive to confirm or to rule out sexual assault due to the extent of the burning. The post-mortem fire destroyed nearly all the soft tissue and clothing. No dental restorations were found, no vehicle tracks or impressions were documented, and while the weird-ass freaking gas can was discovered near the site, the fuel didn't match the accelerant used, so it really tells us nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
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 Yeah. So, and who the hell knows? We've talked about it.
We're beating a dead horse at this point.
Yeah, we really are. And there's another painful commonality shared by Clara, Rachel, and Emily. They're all unidentified.
Mm.
I don't know. It's really freaking tough. I know I've said it like over and over again, but research in these cases, it's harder than researching, and not just harder because there's less information out there. It's harder because my heart just goes out to them, and it goes out to their families if they were decent, which they very well might have been, because you got to put yourself in the era, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so kids were doing this all over the freaking place, and it wasn't all that uncommon, in the going way back, for kids to take off and start a life somewhere and never have contact with their family.
Yeah.
Now we think of it as insane, like, oh my gosh, but that was a period of time where that was relatively normal. And if you chose not to just take up roots where your family lived, where you grew up, chances are you might not see your family again.
Yeah.
I mean, if we go back far enough, where traveling was significantly more difficult,
Mm.
Even to like our grandparents' generation, when you're talking about having to drive a Model T across country, well, people just didn't do that shit. It didn't happen.
You might as well walk.
Yeah, it just didn't happen. And, taking a horse, well, you're not going to do that. So what would happen is a lot of times people would take a train to a new location, but you think about, like the pioneers that settled the West or whatever, come out in covered wagons and shit like that. They never went home.
No, they never
saw their family again.
Unless the family followed them out.
Right. Yeah, but there wasn't like Thanksgiving visits.
No, I have never seen a story of anybody going back once they landed.
No.
Out here.
No, it just didn't happen. And so I know we're talking about the 70s and we're not talking about the 1800s, but still, it was still more that way than it is now, where somebody might pick up and so my point is these families might just have assumed that their daughter went off and started a new life and hoped that she was happy and hoped for the best.
Married, she's doing well, all the things.
And then, if they were older, if her parents were older, say maybe in their 70s or something like that, in 74, or 72, whenever these girls went missing, and they didn't have a whole passel of siblings, then once their parents passed, there's nobody to carry the torch.
Yeah.
So they just become forgotten. And that still happens today.
And it's harder to find women because our names change when we get married most of the time.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And, we're talking about this, but, we're also, it also brings to mind cases like, John Benet Ramsey, Maura Murray, Heather Elvis, Brooklyn Farthing, like all of these cases that we've covered that are unsolved, and their parents are their biggest advocates.
Yeah.
Julie Murray has kind of taken the torch a little bit from Fred, but the parents are typically the biggest advocates.
Yeah, the point is the family is there looking.
Right. But once the parents die, then if there's siblings, maybe the siblings carry on, but that's not as guaranteed as it is with parents.
Yeah.
And then once the siblings go, there's nobody.
Nobody, because, the nephews and nieces.
Yeah. I mean,
it's not as strong with them. So
it's not as strong. They never knew these people.
Yeah.
Maybe they grew up hearing stories about them, but they never knew them.
There might be the one-off that's like, I am going to find that person.
Yeah.
For the sanctity of my mom, but.
And it happens. We hear stories about, those that have carried that torch, but it's rare.
It was all my life and I need to know the end. And
Yep. But yeah, it's rare. And so it's as sad as it is to say, I can't attack the families for not continuing to search or whatever, because for a couple of reasons. One, that aspect that it was the 70s and it was different and people would just leave and you may not hear from them again. And then two, what tools are at their disposal?
Yeah. Lack of money. Do they even know what direction they went?
Yeah. I mean, so we know that she could have potentially come from Oregon and California, but she could have come from other areas too. And what are you going to do? Plaster the entire United States in missing persons flyers?
Yeah.
You know how impossible that would be in 1974?
Yeah.
Because your ass would literally have to do all of the driving and drive from place to place to place. There is no email.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You could call grocery stores and something and see but it's impractical.
Yeah.
So to understand how Clara vanished, we have to understand where she vanished from. Elko County in 1974 was a crossroads. The I-80 corridor brought truckers, ranch hands, and seasonal workers from across the western U.S. Mining operations had expanded, and with them came transients, workers who drift in for weeks and then leave without notice. The anonymity of that lifestyle made women like Clara vulnerable. She could have arrived in Elko a week before her death. Or 6 months. No employment records, no paper trail, no lasting connections.
And it wasn't just people passing through, it was silence. If someone went missing in this part of Nevada, law enforcement might not know for weeks or ever. Claire's case, like others in this region, faced that same dead air.
There's no way to say for certain whether Claire's killer was local or a traveler, But the geography does suggest intent. Clara was left in that dry wash that required some familiarity with the land, not because it was scenic or symbolic, but because it was quiet. And in 74, it was even quieter than it is now. But here's the thing, her case isn't just a one-off. When you step back and study the placements, the rural sites, the partial remains, the isolation, you start to see a grim consistency.
And that's what makes the Great Basin different from urban serial cases. The silence here isn't accidental, it's engineered.
Exactly. It's not a killer vanishing into the crowd. It's a killer counting on the fact that no one was ever going to come looking to begin with. And yet, people did come. And so, someone did find Clara. And despite the fire, despite the fuel, despite the distance, she's been remembered. The red freaking weird-ass can, still there when authorities arrived. The bones, still preserved enough for forensic analysis. And the landscape, it refused to stay silent. Clara's killer may have chosen the Great Basin for its silence, but that silence is over now.
She has a name here, a story, and a voice.
She didn't have a name when they found her, just a place. A dry wash north of Thousand Springs. Just a date, July 16th, 1974, and just the charred outline of what had once been a woman, reduced to skeletal remains by fire. But there's a story here, one not told through voice, but through silence, one not preserved in memory, but in bone. And in this series, Rocky Mountain Reckoning, we believe silence is a witness. And even in that silence, Clara, our name for her, deserves to be heard. There was no soft tissue, no blood, no fibers, but the bones told part of the story. Clara's dental profile showed signs of dental fluorosis. That gives us a limited geographical window. High fluoride regions include parts of central Nevada, eastern Oregon, rural Utah. No evidence of dental work was noted in the official records. No fillings, no caps, no bridges, just teeth shaped by groundwater. Her mitochondrial DNA was collected and entered into national databases, but as of today, she still remains unmatched. That could mean her relatives never submitted samples, or it could mean she has no family left to submit them. Her height is estimated at between 5'1" and 5'9", depending on what source you go with.
Right.
The age range, late teens to early 20s. We know she had auburn hair and that she had no clothes that were found. The details we do have lead nowhere. The ones that might matter the most, her face, her clothes, her name, were taken by the flames. So let's talk about signature. MO is how the killer operates, what they do to achieve the kill. Signature is what they need to do. Rituals, behaviors, or choices that fulfill a psychological drive. With Clara, we're limited. There's no indication of posing, no ligatures, no sexual evidence, because none could survive. But there is the fire, and there is the location, the isolation. Official records indicate that Clara was likely killed elsewhere and then brought to the dry wash post-mortem. The position of the skeletal remains, disarticulated and heavily damaged, suggests relocation before burning. That could indicate a signature element, the concealment or erasure of identity. Whether the killer sought to hide evidence or exert post-mortem control, the act of setting fire to her body speaks volumes, even if we don't know what language it's in. So we've covered Emily, found in Star Valley, and Rachel, recovered in a ditch in White Pine County. All three women were found in Nevada's high desert with significant distance between their discovery sites, yet all shared common traits. None were matched to missing persons reports. All were found in areas with minimal human traffic. All had clear signs of fatal violence, and all were denied a name. But like we said before, Kara's case is a little bit more distinct because of the fire. While Emily was shot and Rachel was partially skeletal, neither case involved burning. Clara's death includes an attempted eradication. That raises questions about whether her killer was worried about forensic trace or whether the act was emotionally charged.
And that damn fuel can. Why bring it, only to leave it, unless it was dropped in haste or forgotten, or maybe it wasn't used at all and was already there?
The truth is, we just do not know. But its presence means we can't treat Clara like a one-note tragedy. Her case may hold the key to unlocking behavioral consistency or confirming randomness. So there's still several avenues open. Forensic genealogy, like we said, her DNA, it remains in CODIS, and with broader use of familial matching, there is still hope her relatives might one day be found. Then we have the geochemical isotope analysis. Her fluorosis could be triangulated with isotope testing to further narrow her region of origin, especially if matched to known well systems or aquifers. The fuel can manufacture date. If any batch records survive from the 1970s, the make and model of the red plastic can might narrow distribution centers, but that's a long shot.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have cold case comparison. New data sharing systems could allow her case to be cross-referenced with missing persons from Utah, Oregon, Wyoming, Nevada, who were never entered into NamUs. This requires human review, someone combing yearbooks, phone books, local newspaper classifieds, which frankly is the kind of work this community was built to do.
So what do we call it? Not a signature, not a pattern, maybe just a trace?
Maybe that's enough, because in Clara's absence, we have one truth. Someone brought her to that wash. Someone set her on fire, and someone walked away. They may have thought they erased her, but they left behind dust, and in this series, we followed the dust. Clara's story doesn't just begin with her discovery in a dry wash north of Thousand Springs. It begins with an absence. No name, no ID, no one looking for her. Official records say she was found on July 16th, 1974, that she'd been strangled. She had a fractured hyoid bone to confirm that. Her body, reduced to skeletal remains, showed evidence of post-mortem burning. There were no clothing fragments, no jewelry, no wallet. But what we do have is evidence of a killer's choices, location, method, concealment. Each of those decisions leaves a trace, and that's what we're here to examine. This segment is about the suspects, not definitive answers, but viable candidates, men who intersect with these timelines, methods, and locations. Some will be retained for future cases. Others will be set aside, but only if we can say why. So, let's begin with who I'm starting to believe might be one of the biggest pieces of shit ever to walk the face of the earth. This guy is a total asshat. I hate him very much bad. So
Everybody say his name. Let's all say it together.
Dale Wayne. His name has come up earlier in this. His name has been all throughout this. And, you know, I gotta say,
his name might be your dying breath.
It's just crazy because, you know, we started out this series with me explaining how Lisa Marie Kimmel's disappearance really helped kind of ignite this flame of true crime curiosity in me, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until I really started digging into this. I've always said, I think this guy was a serial killer. I think he has more victims. I didn't just come by that shit. It was out there by investigators that dealt in the case. So I've always said that. And then I've always really felt that he was tied to Amy Robectol's disappearance in Lander. And so to say that, you know, I didn't know much about the guy or whatever, that's a misnomer. That's not true. I did. But before I started digging into this series, I never realized.
You didn't know the depth of hate that you had for this man.
I did not. And I did not realize the clusters of bodies that follow this man.
Yeah.
Wherever he lives, there's dead women all over the place.
Yeah.
Is it coincidence?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either. So anyway, Dale, the piece of shit Eaton, in 1988, he murdered Lisa Marie Kimmel. We know that. He's convicted of it. He buried her car in a pit on his property, threw her body off a bridge into the Platte River in Casper. The parallels between Eaton's confirmed murder and Clara's case are notable, not in details of method, but in geography and strategy. So we know from court documents, prison intake records, and family history that this piece of shit was in Elko County in the early 70s. We know that for a fact. His known behaviors, using isolated terrain to avoid detection, operating within the Great Basin corridor, and disposing of victims in ways that delayed discovery, all align with Clara's case. But Eaton's documented homicide occurred 14 years after Clara was killed. There's no forensic evidence tying him directly to Clara. Clara's mitochondrial DNA remains unmatched. There was no third-party DNA found on her, unfortunately. And so we don't have any DNA that we're going to link to a killer in this case, unless there's some holdback information that I don't know about. I don't think there's any of that kind of DNA. So
Not this long. They wouldn't be holding it.
no. So, but there's no biological trace that connects Eaton to this crime.
So dare I ask, John, what makes him more than just a footnote?
You say that almost like you're scared to hear an answer. So, geographic opportunity and behavioral alignment. I mean, we know for an absolute fact that this piece of shit was in this area in the 1970s. And then, not to foreshadow too much, but we're actually going to be leaving this area, and we won't be back until 1993. And just so happens, Delwyn Eaton's there in East County. So Delwyn Eaton's fixing to leave Elko County and go to Wyoming, where we're going to be going, because that's when our next victims are going to be there.
Because we're following him around.
And then this piece of shit isn't going to be back in Elko County until 93, when Shafter County Jane Doe then pops up in 93. At the same time this piece of shit returns to Elko. And not to give away too much, but I've already said this before, but his uncle's son, don't ask, I don't know. His uncle's son was with him in Elko. So we know for a fact that he was there in 93.
Mm-hmm.
So we have that. We have the behavioral alignment. Clara's killer used remoteness deliberately. And this piece of shit was known to do the same. I mean, I know if you're listening out there and you've never been to Wyoming, when I say Moneta, Wyoming, you have no clue what I'm even talking about. But get a map of Wyoming. Pull up Google Maps and type in Moneta, Moneta, and look at where it is. It's in the middle of freaking nowhere. That's where this douchebag lived, and that's where he kept and tortured Lisa Marie Kimmel, in the middle of nowhere. This is what this is his MO, is seclusion. And that doesn't make him Clara's killer, but it does keep him viable, especially given his confirmed presence in the region when she died. So now let's consider Bobby Jack Fowler. Fowler was a violent transient convicted of rape and implicated in several murders in Oregon and British Columbia. His crimes involved overpowering victims, often with brute force, and disposing of bodies in remote locations. He worked construction and traveled extensively throughout the West. Could he have passed through northern Nevada in 74? Absolutely, but that's where the match weakens. Clara was strangled. There's no confirmed blunt force trauma. Fowler typically beat or restrained his victims, sometimes using ligatures or duct tape. Claire's remains showed no evidence of binding, and the burning appears post-mortem. That weird-ass fuel can near her body contained a liquid that didn't match the accelerant, and its presence remains totally unexplained. So, while Fowler had the mobility and the violence, his known methods just don't fit Clara's. Still, we can't rule him out entirely. He stays in the background, on a watch list, not a short list.
So, John, what about Roy Melanson?
Well, Melanson is a textbook predator. He traveled widely, Texas, California, Colorado, often posing as a ranch hand or a laborer to gain access to women. His victims were often strangled, and he left their bodies in isolated areas. He was convicted in 2011 for the 1988 murder in Napa, California, but was suspected in earlier crimes. That's what places him in this discussion. We don't have documentation confirming his presence in Nevada in '74, but Clara's cause of death, manual strangulation, does match Melanson's pattern. He is methodical, he is opportunistic, and he operated in the right states.
So if there's no confirmed presence, is he ruled out?
No. He is retained, not prioritized for Clara, but preserved for comparisons with other victims.
Makes sense.
Particularly any later ones confirmed to have died by strangulation with a desert disposal. So let's shift gears. This worthless pile of freaking disgusting shit. God, this guy disgusts me. And his dumbass
couldn't tell.
Of a worthless ass wife, girlfriend, whatever this freaking animal was, I don't know. But anyway, Gerald Gallego, alongside his worthless bitch of a wife, Charlene, murdered at least 10 young women between 1978 and 1980. They used a van, abducted girls from public spaces like malls and parking lots, and killed them in isolated areas of California, Nevada, and Oregon.
Sick.
Very. And the fact that a woman participates in this shit, it just makes it worse. I don't know why, but it does. And she would lure these girls to him. So I don't know. I get nothing but disdain for actually all these pieces of shit we talk about. But I don't know why it is that I hate some so much more than others. But there are some that just make my blood run cold. Like I just despise them. And the Gallegos are definitely like that.
Yeah. If we haven't said before, we don't mince words here on this.
Yeah, you're probably never going to be left wondering what John thinks.
Yeah, you're never going to wonder what John thinks.
So, Clara's death predates Gallego's confirmed killing spree by 4 years, and her abduction, if there was one, left no witnesses, no vehicle description, no mall or store or urban context, just wilderness. So that's why we can eliminate Gallego for Clara's case. The profiles just don't line up. They may appear in other cases in this series, but not here.
Oh, joy, I cannot wait.
Yeah.
So what about Wayne Nance?
So Nance is the Missoula Mauler, a suspected serial killer who died in '86. Praise be Jesus. After his...
That was not a laughable thing, but... I laugh at weird times. What can I say?
After his death, police uncovered links to several unsolved homicides, most involving extreme violence and sexual assault. He often posed victims or staged scenes. He worked jobs that gave him geographic access throughout the Mountain West. Here's the challenge. Nance's confirmed crimes began years after Clara's murder, but his behavioral patterns, strangulation, remote disposal, staging, do warrant consideration. Again, we have no documentation placing him in Nevada in '74, but his inclusion in this segment is strategic. If future forensic links emerge, Nance needs to be on the board.
So where do we land?
So let's break it down. Dale Wayne Eaton, the strongest viability for Clara. And, I don't just say that because I really hate the piece of shit. I've said before that I really try to do this in a non-biased way. Mm-hmm. And the fact of the matter is, he's the only piece of shit out of the whole collection of pieces of shit that we know for a fact was in Elko County during this time. Mm-hmm. The rest of them we're guessing they could be. They were not. They were a few hundred miles away. Yeah. It's possible. No, we know this son of a bitch was there, and he has familial ties to the Elko area. Mm-hmm. So he could have stayed with family really at any point because he was a transient drifter. So it's not like he would have been missed if he would have cruised on down to Elko for a month and killed himself a couple of women and then come back to Wyoming or whatever. That's just the life he led.
Yeah, he had no legit job to speak of.
He was a welder, and so he had his own welding truck.
Yeah, and not a stationary place where he was.
Well, he worked for himself. So it's not like he had an employer that he was punching time cards for. And if he would have got like a welding contract in northern Nevada during the time, he definitely would have driven his piece of shit old truck out there, stayed with his family, and worked on that job. Yep. And with the mining and the oil and everything in that area, it's very probable that he could have been working those jobs in that area. What we do know for a fact is he was there during the early 70s. So he's definitely retained for consideration. Then we have Body Jack Fowler. It's a weak method match. He's retained for a broader series context. So we can pretty much say he's not included for Clara, but he might pop back up again.
We reserve the right to use him again. Okay.
Right, which is kind of the case for all of these.
Yeah.
I'll say it. So we've got Roy Melanson, the strangulation match, the unknown geographic link. He's retained also. We have the Gallegos, and I haven't decided yet. I think it's very likely that they're not going to reappear in this series for a while, at least.
Okay.
Because, where we're headed, then they weren't tied to Wyoming.
Okay.
And, we're headed to Wyoming here pretty quick. So I wouldn't expect this piece of shit's name to pop back up for a little while, but I can't say that they won't show up again later down the road. And then we've got Wayne Vance.
Run them over when they do?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we could do humanity a favor. Any of these bastards that are still alive, we could just end them and that'd be over with. So
don't call us for jury duty. We've already decided.
On these asshats?
Yeah.
You damn right we have. So, and then finally we have Wayne Nance. He's not a primary suspect for Clara, but he is retained for potential future matches.
Put a pin in him too.
Yes. So
I wasn't waiting for your approval. I had already done it.
I have editing power. I can make it sound normal, except you always got to come in with some kind of thing. It's like, how do I edit this out?
Is that not why I'm here?
It is why you're
That's
here.
What I thought.
So some listeners may wonder why
you do this whole thing by yourself and you wouldn't need me.
It would be so boring, though. Nobody would listen to it. So some listeners may wonder why we don't assign probabilities and draw lines between dots more aggressively. But this isn't about numbers. It's about truth. Clara deserves a solution grounded in evidence, not speculation. We've got the red fuel can, that weird-ass thing that continues to plague us. The fuel inside didn't match the accelerant used. Was it left in panic? Was it a misdirection? Did it belong to somebody else entirely?
Was it aliens at this point?
We don't know. The burning obscured evidence, but what's left, the pattern of death, the location, the absence, it still tells us something.
And her age?
Per official records, Clara was likely in her late teens to mid-20s. That puts her in the same age range as most other victims across the Great Basin that are included in this series. Women whose lives were stolen and names lost. Obviously, no suspect has been charged in Clara's case, and for now, no suspect may ever be. But that doesn't mean that we stop. In the next segment, we'll walk through the sequence of events that investigators believe led to Clara's death, and what the scene tells us about what happened in her final hours. She wasn't supposed to be here. Thousand Springs is the kind of place where time forgets to pass. Barren ridges sweep across the Nevada desert, parched by sun and silence. There's nothing out here but wind, sagebrush, and the quiet certainty that someone will be forgotten. And on July 16th, 1974, that certainty came true. According to the official records, Clara was found approximately 11 miles north of Thousand Springs. Her skeletal remains were partially burned. No skin, no clothing, no personal effects, just bone. A weird red fuel can rested nearby. There was no identification, no indication of who she was or why she had ended up in such a remote part of Elko County. We know she died by strangulation, but that's the only certainty. Everything else has been stripped away by heat and time.
And that's the thing with desert fires. They don't just destroy evidence, they erase identity. They level the field between accident and murder, between victim and ghost.
The remote nature of the dry wash suggests that it was specifically selected. There's no natural foot traffic here, no line of sight for major roads, and no reason to wander into it without a plan. But whether the killer had intimate knowledge of the area or just stumbled across it is something that we can't confirm. The fire did what it was supposed to do, obscure the truth. It destroyed potential trace evidence and limited the autopsy to bone-level analysis. The damage was so extensive that official records confirm no estimate can be made of Clara's actual height, weight, eye color. There's no dental match, no identifying scars or tattoos. Even her hair color is a bit uncertain.
That makes this even harder because someone might have seen her at a diner or gas station and remembered a girl with auburn hair. But if it's not verifiable, it's just a shadow in the record.
Exactly. And Clara's dental records don't match any known missing persons. Her mitochondrial DNA has been entered, but so far, nothing. She remains unidentified. Here's where we have to tread a little bit carefully. There's a tendency to over-speculate, to imagine she was a runaway, a hitchhiker, a transient, but official records do not provide that context. What we can say is that the I-80 corridor was busy, like we've said, in the 1970s, especially in the summertime. It was a mix of long-haul truckers, seasonal workers, and travelers trying to cross the country on a shoestring budget. Small towns like Wells, Carlin, or even Wendover saw hundreds of young women pass through bus stations, diners, and motels every year. Clara could have been one of them. She might have had a destination, or she might have already arrived.
And there's a loneliness to that, being out in the desert surrounded by nothing but sagebrush and sky with no one knowing your name.
And then something happened. Clara was killed. Not in a rage, not by accident. Strangulation, according to official records, implies a deliberate, sustained act of control. It is not fast. It is not clean. And a decision to burn her afterward makes this even more complex. We don't know if Clara died at the dry wash. Official records do not provide evidence of a struggle or transport. It's possible that she was killed elsewhere and brought here. It's equally possible that she died there and was immediately burned, but no blood, no tire impressions, or other transfer evidence was documented, likely because the fire destroyed it or time erased it. What remains are questions. How did she get here? Did someone drive her into the wash with the promise of something? Was she already dead before the fire? Was the killer alone? We can't answer those, not without more evidence, not without a name.
But we can say this. Whoever did this wanted her gone. Not just gone from this earth, but gone from memory, from identity. They didn't dump her in a ditch or leave her in a hotel room. They brought her to one of the most remote areas in Elko County, set her on fire, and vanished.
There's something almost ritualistic about it, but we're not here to assign meaning to what we can't prove. All we can do is look at the evidence. No jewelry, no purse, no identification, no matching missing persons report, no evidence of where she came from or what brought her here. And yet she lingers in public records in the silence of the wash. And now in this episode, if there's anything that we've learned from Clara's case, it's how fragile memory can be. Her name is gone. Her face gone. Even the state couldn't give her a profile beyond young woman, likely white, with no confirmed features. But we do know that she lived, she laughed, she had a family, and she had a first day of school and a last day she saw the sky. She deserved more.
Someone knew her. Someone knows that she never came home.
The public memory of Clara, our name for the unidentified woman found in the desert near Thousand Springs, is practically non-existent. No obituary, no school photo, no news cycle, no search parties, just a blip in the local news. And even that, barely more than a paragraph.
It's not just haunting, it's strategic. Because in 1974, stories like Clara's didn't make front pages unless someone famous was involved or unless the crime scene was too loud to ignore. Clara's case wasn't loud. It was ash and bone.
In preparing for this episode, we reviewed dozens of newspaper archives from Nevada, Utah, Idaho, Northern California, and the results? Disheartening. The Elko Daily Free Press, the closest paper to the crime scene, ran a small article 3 days after Clara's remains were discovered. The headline? Remains found north of Thousand Springs. No photo, no sketch, just a note that some skeletal remains had been found in a dry wash and that investigators were working to identify the victim. That was it. No follow-up, no statewide alerts, no name ever attached.
Compare that to the known homicide cases in Reno or Vegas in the same era. Those got weeks of coverage. Full courtroom photos, family interviews. But Clara, she didn't have a name, a community, or a campaign. She was silence in the form of a headline.
We also checked Salt Lake City's Deseret News, Boise's Idaho Statesman, and multiple Sacramento papers. None of them ran stories on Clara's death. And yet, during the same week in July 1974, all those outlets ran articles about a missing college student from California, a new freeway interchange in Ogden, and livestock prices at auction. It's not that the public wasn't interested in stories like Clara's, it's that they were never given those stories. Her death was made invisible.
It was ghosted by the press and swallowed by geography. And that silence, the vacuum left behind, creates two kinds of harm. First, it prevents justice. But second, it allows the killer to vanish without consequence, because nobody was looking. Not really.
And this isn't unique to Clara. In researching Rocky Mountain Reckoning, I've identified dozens of women and girls found across Nevada, Utah, Idaho, Wyoming in the 1960s through the 1980s whose deaths received little to no coverage. Many were listed in local police blotters or sheriff's logs, but never written up by any major outlets. No one tracked them. No one followed up. And then the silence stretched long enough that they disappeared from memory entirely.
We talk about the golden age of serial killers in the 70s and 80s, but we rarely ask why so many killers got away with so much. Part of the answer? Media infrastructure. Local newspapers were overburdened. National media wasn't interested in stories without a headline-grabbing angle. And women who were indigenous, transient, working class, or simply unidentified, they got the least coverage of all.
In Clara's case, we see all those factors collide. She was likely not from Elko County. There were no local missing persons reports that matched her description. She may have been a hitchhiker, a runaway, or simply passing through. That made her no one's hometown headline. And once it was clear there wouldn't be an arrest or a confirmed identity, the press moved on. We did find a single mention, a one-sentence update in August of 1974. The Elko County Sheriff was quoted saying that the body was, quote, still not identified, and that investigation is ongoing. That was the last known public statement.
That silence has consequences because public forgetting isn't passive, it's active. When people don't see a victim's face or hear her name, they assume the case was solved or that it didn't matter. And that's how killers walk free.
It also affects families. If Clara's family is out there, someone who once knew her, they may not even know she's gone. They might still be wondering why she never came home. Without media coverage, without sketches, without awareness, those connections are lost. And once they're gone, it becomes almost impossible to get them back.
I want to step back for a moment and look at the community itself. Elko County in 1974 was still relatively isolated. The sheriff's department had fewer than a dozen full-time deputies covering over 17,000 square miles. That's bigger than 9 U.S. states. And in many rural areas, crime scene protocol was improvisational.
Exactly. There's reason to believe that Clara's crime scene wasn't fully secured. We know that she was just stumbled across. We don't know how many people entered that area before investigators arrive. We also don't know what evidence might have been destroyed by the fire, wind, animals, or even well-meaning searchers. When we talk about media silence, we have to also talk about resource silence. Elko didn't have a forensic team. They didn't have a full-time pathologist on site. They relied on state labs, sometimes 2 or 3 weeks out from the scene.
And in that time, memories fade, tips dry up, and leads disappear.
And yet, Clara's case is still open, technically. NamUs lists her as UP11311. No matches, no reconstructions, just the date, the location, and the method: strangulation, fire. In 2024, a small note was added to the record. Quote, case reopened for DNA evaluation. That may mean that her remains were tested again. It may mean someone's still looking. We reached out to Elko County for comment, but we haven't yet received a reply.
That's not unusual. Many of these cold cases get reopened quietly, but without public awareness, there's little chance someone recognizes a sketch or hears a name and comes forward.
And that's where podcasts like this one come in. Not to solve the case, but to give the victim visibility. When media failed Clara in 1974, her killer became harder to find. Her life became easier to erase. And silence took root where outrage should have been. So let's be clear about something. Public attention does matter. We've seen it in other cases. Tammy Terrell, murdered in 1980 and left in Henderson, Nevada, was finally identified after decades of media silence, thanks to public pressure, online genealogists, and a relentless push from digital advocates. The difference between a known and an unknown victim often comes down to whether someone talked.
And so far, no one has talked for Clara. That's why we chose her name, not to impose an identity, but to give her a space in memory that silence tried to erase.
So in this next segment, we're going to explore how DNA, genealogy, and forensic sketching might finally bring a name to Claire's case. But for now, let's sit with the silence. Let's remember what was never said. And let's be the voice that finally speaks her back into history. When Claire was found in July 1974, DNA wasn't even part of the investigative vocabulary. The concept of using genetic material to solve crimes wouldn't enter the courtroom for another decade, and even then, it would take years before cold cases like Claire's could even benefit. But today, that's where hope lives.
We often think of forensic genealogy as this brand new tool, but really it's an extension of something families have been doing for generations, trying to find the roots. The only difference is now we can do it with science, with data, and in Claire's case, that may be the only chance left to say her name.
So let's start with the basics. We know Claire's remains were recovered from that dry wash north of Thousand Springs. We know about the fire that destroyed the soft tissue. The only things left were bone fragments, part of a jaw, some teeth, and that weird-ass gas can. For years, that was it. But in 2012, her remains were exhumed as part of a cold case initiative. A small team, state crime lab specialists, university researchers, and a volunteer genealogist worked to extract mitochondrial DNA from one of her femurs. It was a long shot. The heat from the fire had compromised the material, but they got a sequence.
The sequence was added to CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System. But here's the problem. Claire was never reported missing, not in Nevada, not in any neighboring states, so there was no profile to compare it to, no match.
That's where forensic genealogy enters the picture. Rather than looking for a direct match in law enforcement databases, genealogists upload DNA profiles to public platforms like GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA, Ancestry.com, 23andMe. I mean, there's a shit ton of these things now. And there's services where everyday people voluntarily upload their DNA to find relatives, and sometimes they find the unknown. As of 2023, Claire's case was included in a batch submission for the Nevada Cold Case Initiative aimed at solving decades-old unidentified remains. The genealogy lab used a process called SNP testing, single nucleotide polymorphism, which looks at tiny variations in DNA that can reveal ancestral clues.
And this is where things get tricky. Claire's DNA showed markers consistent with someone from the Great Basin region. That includes parts of central Nevada, Utah, and southeast Oregon. These aren't exact locations, but rather probabilities. Geographic trends passed down in DNA over generations. One of the most telling indicators? That dental fluorosis.
We mentioned earlier that Claire's teeth, recovered intact despite the fire, showed signs of fluorosis, those small white lines across the enamel, and usually caused by excessive fluoride exposure. This lines up with rural towns that had high naturally occurring fluoride in the water supplies during the 1950s and 60s. Places like Ely, Tonopah, and certain parts of rural Utah. And that narrows things down. Not enough to identify her, but enough to say Clara likely grew up in this region. She wasn't just passing through.
But even with that, there's a major hurdle. Many of the people living in those regions during that era were transient. Miners, ranch workers, railroad families. They didn't always leave paper trails. And if Claire's family moved often, or was disconnected from formal institutions like school or church, there may be no missing person report anywhere.
Still, there's hope. In early 2024, we confirmed with the Nevada Forensic Lab that Clara's SNP data had produced multiple distant cousin matches, third and fourth cousins. These are the building blocks of what's called genetic triangulation. Genealogists use these small matches to build family trees, branch by branch, tracing backward until they find a common ancestor. Then they move forward, identifying all descendants of that person. Somewhere in that descendant pool is Clara.
But this is painstaking work. Each family tree can take months. It requires census records, obituaries, archived marriage licenses, sometimes even funeral guest books. And since Clara's closest matches are distant relatives, there's a wide margin of error.
Still, it works. The same technique helped identify Tammy Terrell in Henderson, Nevada, and it helped name the previously unknown Washoe County Jane Doe, whose remains were found near I-80 in 1982. Both had no direct DNA matches, but genealogy cracked them open. The difference with Clara? There hasn't been a media push. No campaign, no dedicated family member posting updates or running a Facebook page. Her tree is being built in silence by volunteers on their own time.
That's what makes this podcast part of the process. By saying her name, Clara, we create the possibility that someone hears something familiar. A town, a date, a detail, and suddenly what was once just bone and data becomes recognizable.
And it leads us to another tool, forensic art. In 2021, the Nevada Cold Case Project commissioned a forensic facial approximation based on Clara's skull. It was created using digital rendering software and 3D cranial markers. A composite sketch built from probability and facial autonomy. The sketch was released to law enforcement, but never shared publicly, which I don't get that shit at all.
Yeah.
We have requested it for this episode, but we haven't received a response. If it's released, we'll add it to our episode notes and to her blog post on our webpage.
We also spoke to volunteers in the online cold case community, people who follow NamUs, Doe Network, and other platforms. A few had made their own speculative sketches. Others had proposed matches to known missing persons. None of them have stuck. Either the dates didn't line up or the locations were too far removed from Clara's dental and DNA profile.
There was one theory that we found compelling. A user from WebSleuth proposed in 2022 that Clara might be connected to a missing girl from Central Oregon who disappeared in late 1973. That girl, then 17, was never officially reported missing, but had been known to hitchhike. The family didn't believe she had vanished. She had just left. They only began asking questions when they saw a composite sketch years later from another case entirely. But the DNA profile for that family didn't match Clara's. The search dead-ended. It's possible the right family just hasn't tested yet, or maybe Clara never had family in the traditional sense.
It's easy to feel hopelessness. Well, it's easy to feel hopeless in the face of that silence. But we've seen stranger cases break open. Some after 40 years, some after 60. The key is persistence. And in Clara's case, that means two things: people listening and people testing.
So if you're from the Great Basin, especially rural Nevada, Utah, or Oregon, and your family has a missing link, anyone who may have vanished around 1974, someone you were told went off the grid or moved away and never came back, please consider submitting a DNA test through GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA and opting in to law enforcement matching. It costs nothing and it may solve a murder.
We'll include links in the show notes. You can also reach out directly to the Nevada Cold Case Initiative. They're small, underfunded, and often rely on community outreach to make progress. Every email, every tip, every test, it matters.
Because Clara deserves more than silence. She deserves her real name. She deserves to be mourned by the people who loved her, not by strangers decades later.
In the final segment of this episode, we'll look at the legacy Clara leaves behind, even unnamed, how her case shaped forensic advocacy, inspired modern investigation, and became a touchstone in the broader effort to identify the voiceless. And after that, a tribute to the woman we call Clara, to the ones we've lost, to the ones we still search for.
Clara's story doesn't end in a wash outside Thousand Springs. Not really. Her bones may still rest in a forensic archive drawer, tagged with a case number and a label unidentified. But her story has left fingerprints across modern forensic science, missing persons advocacy, and how we talk about the forgotten dead. Because even without a name, Clara changed things.
One of the strangest truths we've come to understand through this series is that being forgotten doesn't mean being invisible. Clara's case has rippled across decades, sparking quiet reforms and subtle shifts in how rural jurisdictions treat unidentified persons. And that impact is real, even if you won't find it in the headlines.
So let's talk about the institutional side of her legacy first. Clara's case, rediscovered during a 2010 statewide audit of cold cases, played a pivotal role in pushing Nevada's Department of Public Safety to formalize its approach to long-term unidentified remains. Prior to that point, cases like Clara's were often managed by whichever agency found them. Evidence could be stored in a closet, a county warehouse, or sometimes not at all. But in 2012, the same year her bones were exhumed for DNA testing, the state implemented a centralized tracking initiative for all unidentified decedents, and Clara was one of the first entries.
That was also when the state began working more closely with NamUs, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Before 2010, Nevada had one of the lowest upload rates in the western U.S., but by 2015, after advocates like Todd Matthews and Dr. Arpad Voss visited the region, Nevada's numbers had quadrupled, and Clara's profile, created in 2013, became a teaching tool.
Law enforcement cadets across Nevada now train using real-world unidentified cases, including Clara's. Her burned bones, the fuel can, the lack of a missing persons match, it's all used to teach pattern recognition, evidence triage, and the importance of interagency collaboration. She is literally part of the curriculum.
But Clara's impact didn't stop with the professionals. She also shaped volunteer movements. In 2016, a regional Doe network group launched what they called the Great Basin Project. The first test case? Clara. Volunteers from Nevada, Oregon, and Utah poured through old newspapers, tracked census patterns based on her fluorosis, and flagged missing girls whose names had never made it into NamUs. Some of those names were eventually added. One of them led to a family in Elko County requesting a DNA test. It wasn't a match, but it was because of Clara that the family was reconnected to law enforcement for the first time in 40 years.
That kind of impact? It's impossible to measure. In 2018, the first statewide conference on cold cases in Nevada included a breakout session titled Justice for the Unnamed. Clara's case was one of the 3 examples used to illustrate the challenges of working with degraded remains and no missing persons anchor. Several coroners who attended that session later implemented tracking protocols in their counties, creating storage logs, requesting NamUs uploads, and digitizing paper records from the 1960s and 70s. That never would have happened without Clara.
And while the system slowly evolves, Clara's case also shifted how people like us, podcasters, researchers, amateur sleuths, talk about the unidentified. Before this wave of digital storytelling, it was easy to refer to cases like hers by their locations. The Thousand Springs Doe, the Washoe County female. These were placeholders, sure, but they also dehumanized the women involved.
That's why we started using names. And I do want to be clear here. I am not criticizing agencies for labeling them John Doe and Jane Doe.
Right.
It's insane to even expect that they would give them names.
Right.
So I'm not criticizing that. But we want to use names. Obviously not legal names, not assumptions, but narrative placeholders. Names like Rachel, like Emily, like Clara. There will be more, but they're not there to solve the case. They're there just to say, this was a person.
And those names, Rachel, Emily, Clara, they resonate. We've had listeners write in saying they've dreamt of girls after hearing their episodes. They've dreamt of the girls after hearing their episodes. That they felt like they knew them. That they couldn't drive past certain highways anymore without thinking of those lonely bodies left behind in the dirt. That connection, that's advocacy. It's not solving the case, but it's refusing to look away.
And for the people who do work these cases, that visibility matters. In 2022, a retired forensic pathologist from Reno said something during an interview that stuck with me. He said, quote, "The women we never identified, they visit me more often than the ones that we did." He meant it metaphorically, of course, but the guilt was real because for decades, nobody came for Clara. Nobody put up posters. Nobody started a GoFundMe for DNA. No sheriff's department held a press conference. Her skull sat in a box while the world moved on.
Until now, until this series, until you, our listeners, decided that wasn't good enough.
The real power of a show like Dark Dialogue, Rocky Mountain Reckoning isn't the microphone. It's the network. Each of you who follows the Adopt a Victim program, each of you who shares a composite sketch, calls in a tip, or simply talks about these women at your dinner table, you're part of this legacy now. And that's how Clara lives on, through action, through memory, through the refusal to let her vanish again.
In the final portion of this episode, John will offer a tribute to Clara, to the silence she endured, to the change she inspired, because even without a name, she mattered, and she still does.
Clara, that's the name we gave you. We don't know if it's close, if you'd have liked it, if it matches the shape your mother once whispered at bedtime, but we gave it to you with care, because what happened to you, the erasure, the silence, the way your body was stripped not only of life, but of name, of clothing, of memory, that deserves to be defied. You deserve to be remembered with more than a case number. You deserve to be called. Clara, your story begins somewhere else, in a town that likely doesn't remember you're missing, on a school roster that no longer includes your name, maybe in a dental record that never got digitized. You were somebody's daughter, maybe somebody's sister, maybe somebody's friend, or maybe you felt alone, as so many women in that time and place did. We can't say for sure how you arrived in that stretch of desert, whether it was by car or by truck, whether you were fleeing something or someone, or whether you were just trusting the wrong ride. We only know how it ended, that your bones were found burned and broken in a dry wash outside Thousand Springs, that someone tried to make sure you disappeared forever, and they almost succeeded. But Clara, this world doesn't forget as easily anymore. There are teams now, scientists and advocates, volunteers and strangers, people who study bones, who test mitochondrial DNA, who map old highway routes and connect long forgotten names to long buried stories. You're not a Jane Doe anymore, not to us. You're a warning and a witness. You are a thread in the tapestry of women who never made it home, but still refuse to be invisible. And what strikes me most is this: you didn't ask for any of this. You didn't choose to be a part of some broader legacy. You didn't ask to be an example or a cold case training tool or a podcast subject. You just lived, and then someone took that from you. What's left? The silence, the fragments, the questions. They're not the sum of your life, but they are what we have, and we will not waste them. There's something sacred in remembering, in refusing to let cruelty have the last word, in creating space, however small, for grief, for fury, for dignity. So we say your name, Clara. We tell your story as best we can. We place your memory on the record, not just in some database, but in the hearts of people who never met you, but still care that you existed. If there's any comfort to be found, maybe it's this: your story has moved people. It has inspired changes in how Nevada tracks the unidentified. It has reshaped how we tell stories about the forgotten. It has brought strangers together around conference tables in forensic labs, behind microphones, to say, this woman mattered, even without a name, even without a face, even without a voice. So, wherever you began, wherever your spirit wandered when the desert took you, may you know this: you are not forgotten, you are not alone, you are not just evidence. You are Clara, and you are remembered.
We want to thank you for walking this road with us. Thousand Springs Jane Doe, Clara, as we've chosen to call her, is more than a case file, more than charred bones and scattered fragments in an evidence box. She is someone's daughter, someone's lost memory, and she deserves to be known. This isn't just about bringing justice to her story. It's about the hundreds of other missing and unidentified women lost in the shadowed valleys of the West. It's about building a collective that refuses to forget. And you're part of that now.
If Clara's story has moved you, and we hope that it did, there are a few ways that you can stand with us. First, visit darkdialogue.com to access maps, documents, photos, and forensic reconstructions tied to every victim that we cover in Rocky Mountain Reckoning series.
There, you can also join the Adopt a Victim initiative. Whether you want to research from home, help with genealogy, or organize search efforts in the field, there's a role for you. Choose a case, join a team, and help return a name to the nameless. You don't have to be an expert, just someone who gives a damn.
If you're able, we also appreciate your support on Patreon, Ko-fi, and Substack. Every donation helps us travel to case sites, pull records, and maintain the infrastructure needed to keep victims' stories alive and fact-checked.
You can subscribe to our newsletter, The Dark Dispatch, for exclusive updates, case breakthroughs, and field notes from our team. You'll also hear directly from the volunteers behind the scenes, working day and night to carry this mission forward.
And if you want to be a part of that mission yourself, you can join the Adoptive Victim Program or consider joining the Dark Dialogue Collective. It's our volunteer corps. Drone operators, FOIA warriors, family liaisons, audio editors, graphic designers, dog handlers, horseback searchers, ATV searchers. Wherever your skills lie, there is a way to help.
Have a lead, a question, or a case you want us to investigate? Reach out anytime. Our inbox is always open at info@darkdialogue.com.
Before we go, we want to remind you, what we do isn't easy, but it matters. For the ones still missing, for the families still waiting, and for the ones whose names were nearly forgotten but won't be, not if we have anything to say about it.
We'll see you next time on another trail through the high desert silence.
Make the guilty remember, and the lost unforgettable. Face the reckoning.